Cat. 64. The importance of accounting in the business world. Daily you can see the need for people to control their income, maintaining a balance with the expenses dedicated to food, clothing, health, and other variables that are part of the existence in society. This same criterion is applied by businesses and large companies, which need the intervention of specialists who dominate accounting and everything that implies. Accountants are those people who study, analyze, and carry out measurements in the financial field. In this way, they can have a clear notion of the status of the accounts, and from this knowledge use the available resources better. This is the most effective way to plan investments, purchases, and other operations that involve a certain capital. On the other hand, its function is also related to registering documents that demonstrate the economic activity of a business or company. This process is essential to keep everything in order with the demands of the state, consisting of the payment of taxes and the monitoring of the regulations in force according to a specific tax regime. The information about the accounts or the patrimony is reflected in what is known as accounting books. Basically, they are special notebooks where the figures that correspond to sales and purchases that have been made each month are collected. They also record data on employee salaries and other extraordinary expenses. Thanks to the internet and the implementation of computers in different state agencies, now the accounting books can be carried virtually, instead of transcribing the bills and invoices manually. This not only reduces the possibility of errors, but allows to have a better control over the resulting values and taxes of each period. Accounting is an essential tool for an adequate management of resources, both at a personal and business level. Only by knowing in detail the financial situation, it is possible to reduce the risks inherent in any economic transaction. This requires the hiring of people specialized in their characteristics and applications, which is updated in a professional or empirical way. It is very important that large companies and start-ups invest in a well-trained accounting area. Only in this way will they be able to avoid tax problems and determine their profit margin according to the perceived losses or profits. Through this organized and systematic knowledge they will be able to perform better in the market, facilitating the planning of new projects. AAA. 65. The legacy of Socrates and his influence on philosophical thought. When speaking of philosophy, it is necessary to emphasize the postulates of Socrates, which were essential for the development of philosophical thought in the West and the rest of the world. Although there is no written work that has survived to this day, his ideas have been recorded through several testimonies, thanks to the work done by his disciples, among which include Plato, Aristippus, and Antisthenes. In this way, in this essay I will seek to analyze the legacy of Socrates and its importance for the development of philosophy. His teachings were based on objective understanding, focused on a constant introspection about justice, love, and virtue. Having these concepts clear, according to Socrates, was essential for anyone to know himself. In addition, his description of the soul was related to the appreciation of third parties, giving to understand that it was a combination of intelligence and character. In other words, it is what allows us to be qualified as good or bad, or another predominant quality. In the Apology of Socrates, a work written by Plato, one of the most famous phrases of the Greek philosopher is revealed, "I only know that I do not know anything." These words demonstrate the perspective that Socrates had on knowledge, always assuming a position of ignorance. The claim to have absolute reason is left aside, even when you have the supposed certainty on a subject. Thus he avoided falling into the incongruous affirmations of other thinkers of that time, with whom he used to dialogue and giving rise to what is known as Socratic irony. Another important aspect of Socrates' legacy stems from his nonconformity, something that motivated him to oppose popular ignorance, but even more to the knowledge that was imparted in a doctrinal way by self-proclaimed sages, such as philosophers, poets, and artists. Instead, Socrates was aware of his own ignorance, and always tried to make people think, by promoting reflection and introspection. In this way, he became the true initiator of philosophical thought, giving it the primordial objective of analyzing human existence. In conclusion, the influence of Socrates for the development of universal philosophy is indisputable. He laid the foundations for dialectics, asking questions based on certain propositions, which he analyzed together with the respective answers to produce a more solid knowledge. This was a clear reaction against the relativism and subjectivism that was taught by the sophists, creating a new way of thinking that united theory with behavior. CCA 66. The controversy of feminism worldwide. Among the most popular social movements in recent decades is feminism. It is a thought that has had one of the largest deployments worldwide, using the media as the internet to promote their ideas. In this way, thousands of people encourage women to have their role in society respected, but often in an inadequate manner, which conflicts with the gender equality they supposedly defend. Currently it is common to find thousands of feminists in social networks and other similar pages who attack men, generalizing them as a misogynist caricature. Although their objective is the struggle to receive fair treatment and without discrimination, it is common for them to fall into defamation, using rhetoric in a distorted way that confuses criticism of sexism with male action. For many feminists who take their thinking to the extreme, all men are equal and their behavior is condemnable in any kind of circumstance. Likewise, the objections that are expressed against their opinion are rejected with violence, being considered a symptom of complicity. This antagonism is a clear example of the controversy within feminism, where many militants falsely promote equality between the sexes. Instead, it becomes an obsession based on the bad behavior of the male population, diverting attention from real problems that should be studied to find a solution. In this way, the attacks that men receive end up provoking antipathy, both in them and in some women, and negative reflections about feminists and their thinking begin to appear. When everything mentioned above reaches its maximum expression, radical theories appear, such as those that consider that Western civilization is a patriarchy where women have fewer opportunities and rights. There is no doubt that this happens in certain countries, but it is necessary to delimit its scope to stop a subjective vision that only distorts reality. Otherwise, we meet students who preach ideas without reflecting on them, repeating what they read or hear, without reasoning about its veracity. It is extremely important to understand that social inequalities are often caused by a thought that is taken to the extreme. This is the basis of the polemic of feminism, where certain women opt for hatred of the masculine gender, arguing that it is justified because they maintain power and the majority of privileges. The only way to establish a society where the rights and faculties of all are respected, is leaving aside prejudices and stereotypes. AAA 67. Aristotle and its impact on Western thought. On many occasions, professionals in the field of science end up returning to certain philosophical questions. In this way, questions are presented about nature and its interaction with man, as well as the role of the human being in the universe. These questions are based on metaphysics, a discipline whose study was deepened by Aristotle and which today has regained its validity. Thinking about this essay is dedicated to analyzing the work and legacy of one of the most important philosophers of ancient Greece. During his life, Aristotle came to write about all kinds of issues, laying the groundwork for what we now consider common sense. His works cover areas as diverse as politics and astronomy, but also ethics and biology. In the case of the latter, they are the first investigations that were carried out from a systematic point of view. This has allowed him to be considered one of the founders of biology, largely thanks to his desire to know and symbolize, accompanied by a remarkable intuition and a prodigious ability to establish concepts. Another aspect of Western thought that is a direct influence of Aristotle is the value of logic and its implications. Much of his work was devoted to the explanation of criteria that allowed to distinguish and classify the different elements that make up the world. For this, his knowledge in physics was extremely important, which he complemented with a topological intuition when talking about the dimensions of bodies and their transformations. While he could anticipate the principles of thermodynamics, relating the variable of time with the state of matter. This Aristotelian conviction that prevails today also helps us to perceive the causality of emotions and how their consequences can be registered in different areas of society. All this is what causes the tragic representation, as defined by the Greek philosopher. In this way, we still base ourselves unconsciously on their reflections on ethics and politics, trying to understand each factor that is involved in the concept of dignity and the search for happiness. In conclusion, there is no doubt that the works of Aristotle have had an incalculable influence on the thinking of Western society. It is even possible to distinguish the principles of respect for human rights, which currently has become a central issue in the media. Although there are no specific definitions of this in his work, one can find reflections on freedom, which he considered a necessary condition for the transcendence of being. A. 68 Learning Strategies During Childhood. There are a series of adaptation processes that are involved in the development of every child. In this way, through the relationships he establishes within his family, with his friends and the school, he begins to understand the world and how to interact with it. This makes it very important to establish which strategies are used during this stage, since not only reading and writing are involved in learning, but a set of elements that will be essential at the cultural, social, and even political levels. In the first place, it is necessary to mention that reading is a skill that is learned individually, this being a starting point in education. However, aspects such as the country's culture and the motivation that the child experiences should be considered here, given that they influence their behavior and are fundamental to bring about the most significant changes during the initial school levels. The aforementioned makes it extremely important to structure effective strategies to maintain student interest, serving as a support so that the basic ability of reading can be developed in an appropriate manner. The models of learning that have given better results are those that establish ties and strengthen the habit of reading, something that is possible by choosing a material that the child considers interesting. On the other hand, students should be encouraged to reflect, helping them to build their own conclusions so that they can then find the meaning of a text without third-party intervention. In this way, their linguistic development can be favored, having positive effects on their ability to solve problems. Based on their prior knowledge and context, they will be able to carry out selection, prediction, and organization processes. As well as reading, other skills and abilities also depend on the ability of a person to interpret the information around them. Each of them is interrelated, forming part of communication and cognitive development. This makes it necessary that learning strategies are focused on actively using language in society, allowing children to understand the symbolic universe that surrounds them. In conclusion, schools and other educational institutions at basic levels are obliged to incorporate learning strategies that take into account new trends and social changes. Only in this way will children have a better chance to adapt to the world, interpreting their context through coherent relationships that can be established without complications. Likewise, it is very important that models based solely on memorization be discarded completely.